All right, so there's a whole bunch of things I want to test, and whether it's things that I already know the answers to and I just want to put the answers out there because there's no conclusive evidence, or there's things I just want to play with or experiment or test because I feel like it or it might be entertaining. I've kind of always had these ideas floating around in my head, but I've never done anything about it. So I decided I'm going to commit to trying to accomplish something and actually put that information out there. So I'm going to do something simple and quick today. Um, some of you may or may not know that I do custom torque converters. So this is something that is related to part of what I do for a living. I sell a lot of these converters applications that are LS swaps, and they may have a 4.8 or a 5.3 with a 4L80E transmission behind it. So in that application, the converters that I do have the 4L80E pilot height, and you need to run a pilot extender to make up the difference between the 80E pilot height and the end of the crankshaft, where normally the longer pilot 4L60 locates in. So the pilot extender is a cheap way to make up that difference. Now, a lot of people ask, why don't I just do the longer 4L60 pilot height? Well, that's actually harder to do, and the thing of it is that the 4L60 long pilot is the oddity. The 4L80, the Glide, the Turbo 400, and small block Chevy, big block Chevy, all, and the flat 4L80E flex plate or the 99 long crank, those all have the flex plate and the pilot in the same location. Those are the standard. The 4L60 is the oddity. So it's actually better to do everything to that traditional standard and just use a pilot extender than try to reinvent the wheel and make everything to 4L60 because you swapped it or whatever. So originally I was not in the business of making and selling pilot extenders because there's, a bunch of outfits that do it, and I didn't feel like it was anything that needed to be done. Just buy one and it's fine. But I have a lot of customers who do that, and then their message even like, hey man, this thing won't fit. Like, why won't this fit? Help me out. Help me figure this out. And enough times that happened that I decided maybe I need to make these things just to avoid people having those issues, because you get parts, you want to get your stuff together and running. Maybe it's already a running driving car and you're just swapping the converter, and it should be a few hour job, and now nothing fits, and you're not happy about it. You can have the transmission balancing on a jack or 2x4s, or you and two buddies are trying to grill it in. It's just not a fun experience to have. So I decided that if I was going to make these pilot extenders, I need to figure out where the issues were in them, why this is something that's happening frequently. And I suspected that it's the lowest common denominator, which is like the cheapest one from eBay and the cheapest one from Amazon. So that's what I did. I bought the cheapest pilot extender I could off of eBay, and it's a Chinese part that's repackaged and resold by somebody in the US. And I bought the cheapest one off Amazon. At the time when I bought them, I paid about like $13-14 for those off eBay, and I paid like $18 for these off Amazon, and those are by far the cheapest ones. And I suspect that the issues that I found aren't an issue in the ones that are like over $25 or $25. Those ones are probably fine. They're probably made by companies who have their machining practices down and can actually hit a tolerance. So we'll start with those eBay ones. A little brief explanation. I wrote some numbers up on the board. The nominal diameter of the end of the crankshaft and the pilot extender is 1 inch 700. Now, if you actually go around and measure a bunch of LX cranks, they're around 1703, 1704. And also it's going to depend if there's corrosion or if the end of the crank is clean. The pilot on a converter is 1701. Ours are consistently that dimension. That can possibly vary from company to company, but I've measured some stock converters and I've measured our converters. It's 1701. So that's a 2,000 or 3,000 slip fit. That converter will fit right in the end of that crankshaft with absolutely no problem. It'll slide in. So what these pilot extenders need to do is that the part that registers on the pilot needs to match that dimension that the crankshaft is, and the part that replicates the pilot and slides into the crankshaft Needs to replicate the pilot dimension. Easy enough, right? So these eBay ones, the machining on them is pretty good. To me, it looks like they are made in a CNC lathe. Every edge is 45, and they're so equally 45 that I think the depth is controlled in a CNC lathe. There's no real difference between any of the surfaces where the 45 is. The feed rate is also good. There's no ridges on this part. The speeds and the feeds were done well. There's not any chatter on the internal dimensions. Everything's finished nice. The only issue with these, I believe, is that they're coated. They have like a zinc plating on it, like a bolt. So your part probably was really consistent before you coated it, and now you coat it, and there's a little bit of tolerance variation in this coating. That's probably what the issue is with these. And now, all of them but one fit easily in the end of the crankshaft. And I have 6. I wanted an array. I didn't want to just have one and it's good or it's not and you don't learn anything. So I bought a bunch. Yeah, this one locks up. It only goes in about halfway. So if you were to put this on the end of the converter and then try to put it in the car, it's gonna want to bind up, and you could possibly have trouble pushing the bell housing and the transmission all the way up against the engine. It's gonna bind up in here a little bit. You'd have to then take it back down and clean up the end of this, clean the end of your crank, or if maybe you test fit it before you do anything, which I strongly recommend. Test fit all your parts so you're not trying to put in a 180-pound transmission and things aren't quite lining up. The issue with these isn't really on the external dimension. They're okay. The issue is on the internal dimension. They need to be about that 1703, 1704 for a slip fit, and they're not. Not one of these fits on the converter. And some of them almost fit, some of them don't fit at all. So it isn't a matter of machining. They're machined well. What happened is there's, on the internal surface here, this coating, there's a variation in the thickness of it. So a lot of these, let me try to find the one, that's a good one. So they're not concentric. If you measure these things, it's 1703 in one plane, but if you turn the thing 90 degrees, it's 1699. 1699 will not slide over 1701. So I think the issue on these is the plating, not the machining. And in my opinion, I would almost rather have these cheaper ones than the little bit more expensive ones from Amazon, because it's going to be easier to knock down that plating, 2 thou in a couple spots than it is to take a couple thou off the whole thing. So this almost fits. Hopefully you test fit it before you try to put this all in. Especially if you were to stick this in the end of the crank and then try to put the transmission and converter up, like that ain't slided on. You're gonna end up trying to pull the bell housing on with the bolts, break the bell housing, wreck the pump by driving the converter into it. Please just test fit these things. I'm not gonna knock anybody for trying to save a buck, but sometimes the frustration just ain't worth it. We'll go over these Amazon ones now. The Amazon ones, there's a couple that are tight in the crank. That one's a little tight. That one goes right in. That one goes right in. Goes right in. Goes right in. And that one's a little tight. So 2 out of 6, you might have to hit them with some emery cloth. But then none of them fit on the converter at all. And some of them are not even close to going on. Not one fits. So what's the issue with these? Let's take a look at these. Now they're steel, CNC lathe, they're uncoated. The finish on this, though, the feed rate on this is a little too quick. There's ridges in this part, but I suspect what happened is actually the machining process itself. So when you're cutting external dimensions, the tool is much more rigid. So as you're running off parts with this thing turned off to 11, dimensionally the external surfaces are going to be much closer than the internal surfaces. So when you're machining the inside of this part, specifically where this needs to reference onto that pilot, this is drilled for clearance, and then you use a boring bar. Well, boring bars flex more than outside tool holders, so unless they have a short boring bar, if they're just running like a traditional boring bar for cutting holes, it's gonna flex. So if you're running that thing hard, it's gonna spring. So you're gonna lose a couple thou, and if they just did one more spring pass, it'd probably clean it up. And on this one, if you look close, hopefully this focuses, there's even chatter in there. And this ridge right here where it was flexing. So you can clearly see that there was an issue in the tool pass or manufacturing principles where the part that they're cranking out isn't exactly what it is that they designed, and they're just not hitting that dimension that they need to be at. So these won't fit at all. I measured a bunch of them, and they're concentric, so it isn't an issue of there being run out, but a lot of them are 1" 698. 1" 698 will not fit over 1" 701. As a matter of fact, that's quite a snug press fit. You would really have to hit this with a hammer or put it in an actual press to get this thing on there. You're not taking off 3-4 thou with your hands with sandpaper easily. It's going to be hard to get this thing on here. It might be a little easier to take down the pilot on this converter. If you could see in my diagram, just the end of it is that dimension. That's to be able to give it, make it a little bit easier. If it was this dimension all the way across, it'd make it harder to slide the converter into the end of the crankshaft, which is how this is designed. We give about a 1/4 inch for this to center on the crankshaft, and that's it. It's not the whole length of the pilot. This ain't gonna fit. It'd be hard to make it fit. This is what the problem is. So the ones I had made, these particular ones were made by a customer of mine that bought a converter, and we bartered for a converter versus his having his buddy run these off in a CNC lathe. So these are made in the USA, machined out of steel. The machining on them is really good. The feed rate, real good. There's no ridges. He 45'd everything. And I mean, they fit together, which they should fit together, because this dimension is that dimension, this dimension's that dimension. These should slide in as a slip fit. If they do, the converter's going to slide in them, and they're going to slide in the end of the crank. So these are the only ones out of this entire group that go right on the converter. These are also consistent in dimension. I measured this whole batch of them, and I brought out my micrometer just to check, because the caliper isn't accurate enough. But they're consistent to 1/10,000th of an inch. These guys are only like plus or minus 1,000. These are like plus or minus 1 to 2 thousandths. So the consistency on these, the accuracy is there, tenfold versus the cheap offerings on Amazon and eBay. So I would recommend that if you do get a converter from me, I sell these guys for $20. You're paying almost that anyways for something that's maybe not going to fit, you're going to have to work at. And this, you can slide on there no problem. Slip fit the way that it's supposed to be. I will sell these freestanding for $25, so that has to cover shipping and the cost of making them. Or try to lean towards buying some of the ones that are probably made a little bit better, that cost a little over $20, and I bet that they're going to be able to hold a dimension just as well, and you're not going to have this kind of issue. So this is one of those situations where saving a couple bucks you know, it doesn't, it's, you're not actually saving, because especially these, like, you really have to fight these to get them on. So if you bought these and they're $18-19, you really didn't save yourself anything, because you're going to spend, you know, half hour. If you put up the transmission, have to take it back down, maybe hours, get pissed off, want to throw the thing into nearest lake or river. Like, it's just not worth the hassle. Buy something that's going to fit. Or if you can, just run a 4L80E flat flex plate, and then they dimensionally should be consistent, where everything will just slide together. So that's my first information and measure stuff and present some facts videos. I got some other stuff that I'm gonna do, and we might even blow some stuff up, which everybody loves. So have a great day and build something cool.